Well, welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
Yes, she is, and I'm Joe Augustin.
All right.
And my name's Tim Wade. Welcome to the show. It's a show where you're going to find out about the news of the week, things to talk about, things to think about, opinions, ideas that matter, and so that you can be more informed, more in the know. And we've got a special guest joining us today. His name is David Lim. A lot of you in Singapore will probably know David Lim. He was the leader of the first Singaporean expedition to summit Mount Everest. And since then, he's been doing a lot in the world of professional speaking, motivating teams across Asia and across the world. And more recently, he's been investing in his time in extraordinary activities, such as walking his dog. His fur kids get a lot of mentions in his Facebook posts, but at the same time, sort of trying to take over Japan one house at a time. And interestingly enough, now is a collector of vintage cars. Does a collector of one car make you a collector?
Probably. It depends on the size of the headache.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the show, David. Tell us a bit about what you've been doing with this car thing.
Going into semi-retirement, I thought, hey, it'd be cool to do an interesting, what we call, project, and so I got interested in getting a classic car from the 80s. We have a lot of rules in Singapore about what kind of cars you can import in privately on your own. So for a classic car, it's got to be at least 35 years old, for example. So that kind of narrowed down the time frame. And the 80s was a great time, right? That's when we were young. I mean, I was in my 20s. So I began looking around for a car to get into Singapore, to renovate, to refurbish it. So it's a huge, steep learning curve in terms of how these things work, right? I mean, the cars in those days weren't built like they are these days. The feedback you get from the road, the stick shift, the manual aspects, the low level of electronics in the cars actually make the driving experience a lot closer to what driving should be. So the car's in Singapore now, and I've been busy, obviously, educating myself in what needs to be done, what's wrong with it, what needs to be fixed, and getting the parts, which is part of the detective part of the whole mission, right? Getting those spare parts in.
Okay, so I've been having the same experience, but with coffee machines. But with the car side, so I find it very disconcerting that means I'm now a classic, or am I beyond the classic? I mean, if the 80s is the classics, I'm going to be in the vintage era.
Tim, I think the word is relic.
There's a vintage car category under Singapore transport laws as well. So maybe you can fall into that category, vintage.
Okay. I have been imported into the country. Look, so basically, David Lim is, as of right this moment, and he doesn't know this yet, but of right this moment, has started a consultancy business in how to get vintage cars into Singapore. So yeah, all right. Then.
But that's an important point. Most people wouldn't realise that the laws around cars in Singapore are quite strict. I mean, basically, once it's 10 years old, it's scrapped. So it must be incredibly challenging getting a car into Singapore.
You can. You can't import cars more than 3 years old into Singapore until they reach 35 years and older. Then you can import them in. So the idea is that you really want to keep a tight grip of car importation into Singapore and all the rules that apply to what you can and what you can't bring into the country, basically.
Interesting. Alrighty. Who's that?
Somebody sounded like they had a butterfly attacking their microphone. All right, Andrea. So, Joe, you want to give everyone a rundown of what we do in this show and what the format's like? Because you tend to do that really well.
Well, the format's going to be, thanks for checking us out for the first time and speaking to you, the first time watcher, listener, whatever, because this goes out in so many formats, right? Those of you enjoying this right now on your stone tablet, it took a long time to translate, but we got it to you in the end. This program is one that has the ambition of covering a lot of stuff like Tim mentioned before. And so what happens at the start of it is Andrea, who does all the real reading on this show, will help us all catch up at the same time. And then we all have our little bits of commentary that may come along the way. And then we round off the show usually with dropping in on our guest speaker, talking about his or her topic. And then at the last bit, we get all frivolous and talk about the little bits of stuff that should be ignored, but we didn't ignore ourselves. We talk about things that got our attention as well. Is that a frivolous enough description of the whole thing, Tim?
You've frivoled very well. So maybe we
Thank
should
you.
go to the news. Andrew, is this our last show for the year?
Yes, I was just going to say, and it's our last show for the year. So we're back
Okay.
on, I think it's January the 14th.
We better do that
Yeah.
then.
Oh, right. Yeah, I got one too.
Yours looks like a traffic cone. It's like a Where's Wally one.
It's a
All right.
it sparkles too.
I'm going to do mine on the other side so it doesn't get caught up in the branding.
Okay. I wore all my special clothing underneath the waistline.
Too much.
Uh-huh. That's called semi-retired.
I got to take it off.
It's
All
getting a
right.
bit hot. Okay.
So, should we get stuck into the news that struck a chord this week?
Let's go.
Let's do it.
All right. So, I'm sure you all noticed we kicked off with some of the worst ever tornadoes seen in America, in Kentucky and surrounding states. So, the death toll, they were predicting it's going to be well over 100, but it stands at 90 today. And the youngest was 2 months old. So, there's been some other really weird events in the weather. If you've got friends in the US, I'm sure you've been noticing some of the social media posts, fences knocked down, but it's right across the country. It's when one mate said it was 60 degrees Fahrenheit in Boston yesterday in the middle of December, which is quite incredible. But one of the articles to look out for is the jet stream took a sharp turn. And the jet stream is an important part of the climate story, so it's worth paying attention to. And the US got unprecedented tornado weather in December. So there's that word, unprecedented again. On the other side of the world, we had a tragedy. 5 children died in Tasmania, in Australia, in a bouncy council was thrown up in the air like 10 feet, 33 meters, I think.
No, 10 meters.
10 meters, 33 feet.
33 feet, yeah.
Yeah, and five little darlings were killed in this accident. There's, I think, 4 more still in critical condition in hospital. I grew up in a community like this, and you can feel the outpouring and the real grief in Australia over this, countrywide, not just in Tasmania. So that was I found that a very sad story. Did you guys see it?
I did.
Yeah.
I find it terrible.
Yeah.
I
And it's one of
actually hesitated to even go looking at it because I heard about the story and I just thought I'm not going to feel any better by looking at it. But no, Tim, you go ahead first. I've got some additional thoughts, the kinds of thoughts you might not want to hear immediately.
Well, mine is just one of sadness and grief for the parents to have had to deal with that. What's supposed to be a fun occasion on a bouncy castle. I mean, a huge wind has come in and picked this thing up. That was the problem. The kids were jumping up and down on it, and it just got lift, and it ended up being as high as 10 meters in the air. And some of these kids fell off it from that height, who were in the bouncy castle. So it's just one of those things where it just seems like a freak occurrence, although presumably questions will be asked as to why didn't somebody nail the thing down like you would a tent. Yeah. But that must have been a pretty big wind to have come in to do that. But it's just a horrific thing to have happened.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, that's not a... Yeah, that's it.
I was actually surprised to find that there's some countries that actually have warnings about this kind of thing. Bouncy castles come with a warning for this reason as well. So it's one of those things where it's something that people know about and actually have thought about and actually said, okay, it's not we should not do this in some countries, and then in other places we just forget about it because it does look like a lot of fun without any kind of danger until something like this happens.
Yeah,
maybe they should be exclusively indoors. They are rather big things, but they can do them in gyms and sports centers and stuff like that. But that means somebody's got to rent a place and everything gets a lot more expensive. But yeah, it's a terrible one.
Yeah, it was sad. And before Christmas, it's like that.
Andrea, just before you go on, back in the tornado thing, one thing that did stand out from that particular article to me was that the worst hit place was this factory where 100 workers were inside. That means they were working during a giant tornado. Yeah. And I haven't heard any criticism about that. And interestingly enough, the factory was the Mayfield candle factory. And we're coming to the end of the year where everybody buys candles because they don't know what else to buy. And so my my presumption, without any evidence, but my sort of presumption was these people were told to just keep working because they had an output deadline of a whole bunch of candles that needed to go out because of all the orders that come in this time of year. And of course, it's winter and candles are romantic and everything else, and Valentine's Day is coming up and whatever it is. So for me, that seems to suggest that people were not protected for the sake of commerce.
So the reporting says that people were threatened to be fired if they left.
Oh, I didn't see that. So
yeah.
that's horrific.
And they supply to Amazon, so it's obviously been linked to Amazon, but it's a business that supplies to Amazon. But yeah,
no, that's not Amazon's fault. I don't think. I think that's the business's decision on that particular one.
Yeah.
So that's terrible. But the good news one out of that was there were these two kids that were in the bathtub.
Yeah.
And as the thing came through, it sucked the bathtub out of the house, and the bathtub was found somewhere else with the two kids in it, and they were fine. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of weird, but at the same time, clearly the place to go if you're in one of these things is possibly the bathtub or the underground shelters that a lot of them have. If everyone's watched the movie Twister, but these things happening at this time of year is very unusual.
Oh, unprecedented. Remember?
I can't stand that word anymore. Yeah, unprecedented just basically means we knew something like this was going to happen, but we didn't sign off on the accord.
Well, I mean, think about the unprecedented thing as well, right? I mean, I know it's somewhere in our list of things later, but I think it's appropriate here. I heard about a weather report where the temperature was 38 degrees, which seems like a warm day in Singapore, but that was the high temperature they measured in the Arctic, which instantly said that's troubling.
Oh, yeah. And we're going to talk about that in the environment one because it's a big concern, and it's old news, but it's just been confirmed. But the other breaking news this week, of course, Elon Musk is Time's Person of the Year. What do you guys think? What's your opinions? Lots of people have got him.
Well, go ahead, Joe. I mean,
David.
Well, I don't
start with David first.
Yeah. Someone take this bucket of water. Come on, here we go. Here, David, you take it.
I'm not. I fairly ambivalent feelings about billionaires. Obviously he's one of the most high-profile billionaires in the world because of who he is. But don't forget one thing, right? The Time magazine, Person of the Year, doesn't necessarily mean that the person needs to be likable or even a person who exudes positivity in all respects. It's a person who's made the most amount of news or makes the news when he opens his mouth and says things. So in that sense, you might not agree with the decision, but hey, he was obviously quite a strong candidate, whatever you look at it, right? Person of the Year. So I think we're going to move away from the idea that person of the year means somebody who's, oozing the milk of human kindness, or human positivity. Yeah, let's remember that. Yeah, person of the year could be a very powerful newsmaker for good or bad. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, very few people remember the person of the year 1938. A certain guy called Adolf.
Yeah,
I remember that one. Yes.
Yeah,
I don't remember that one because I
wasn't
alive.
but I still think Trump was a bit disappointed he didn't get it.
No, he lost out to Greta.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, how dare they?
And Putin got it a few years ago as well. So the people's choice was actually Bolsonaro, however you say his name, from Brazil. So
Bolsonaro, yeah.
Bolsonaro, that's it.
Yeah. Equally troubling, if not more, actually.
Well, exactly, right?
All right. So look, ultimately, my view on this particular one is Time is a magazine, and their objective is to sell magazines. And so, they'll put on the front cover because they created three new categories, but Heroes of the Year was a new category they created. And so they put all the vaccine scientists on that one because that's not really going to sell too many magazines. But putting Elon, who polarizes people and gets conversations happening, is fantastic for Time's marketing. And then if you have a look at it, and so when it was released, the guy who did the big reveal, the editor did the big reveal on the Today Show, right? So that's a morning show in the US. And I thought to myself, let's do some research. So I went in and I said, well, what are the top morning shows in the US by viewership? Why would they do NBC's Today Show? Well, it just turns out that even though their viewership is slightly behind ABC's Good Morning America, their adult viewership is the highest in America. That is between 25 and 54-year-olds. And these are the people who are likely to buy Times Magazine, be influencers, and be talking about stuff on social media that matters to purchasers. So for Time to target to reveal it on NBC, I don't think is a mistake. And ultimately, they're a magazine that sells advertising. So, they've done it for a while, and they're here to promote something that's going to sell more magazines. I mean, ultimately. But he did say three things that was their reasons for choosing Elon. They said he's been involved. This is a bit interesting, but he's been involved in reshaping life on Earth and possibly elsewhere, which is okay. So that's interesting. They talked about electric cars going huge, largely because of him and what Tesla have done in making people very attentive to that particular market and making it a desirable rather than some sort of weird battery operated miserable thing. And SpaceX was the other thing that they said. NASA's chosen astronauts to the moon to go to the moon again after 50 something years, partly because of what SpaceX has done. And what SpaceX has done is reusing boosters and being able to save costs in that particular way is interesting. So I get it, but I think that's a great one for selling more magazines and getting people talking like we are now. I think there are a lot more deserving people, particularly during a time of a pandemic, that should be on the front cover of that.
Remember last year it was the doctors and nurses on the front line. The front cover was a whole bunch of people. So I think they honoured him, and then they had the hero section. I don't know. I think Musk is one of those really interesting characters. I don't think any of us get him or understand why he does things. But what I like about him is he blows stuff up all the time. He doesn't follow the rules, and he's the world's richest man. But he challenges the status quo, and we need people like that. And I love how he engages as well. Like he really uses Twitter in a way that's very interesting for someone of his caliber, and he talks to his community, and I like that. I don't love him or what he represents, but I don't know. I think it's a good choice for this year.
David, you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, wasn't Elon Musk one of the co-founders of PayPal?
Yeah, he was.
So this is it. So think about it. For a lot of people who are in their 20s, right? They may have actually forgotten that even more than 10 years ago, he was already a cage rattler. He was already he was already a maverick. He was shaking up the whole banking system by this digital format. So I'm not sure how much of a stake I think he actually sold off or something. But definitely he has been around, even shaking things up even way before Tesla, way before SpaceX.
Yeah, well, he bought Tesla too, so it was somebody else's.
Right. And it was just last week. I think there was a report where he owns or has massive shares in a company where they've got this technology, which I think sounds like bots, that gets injected into humans, and it's going to help people who have got quadriplegics. I'll find the article and share it, but there's some really good work being done that doesn't necessarily always get the headlines. But like David said, I love a maverick.
I mean, I like Elon. I was coming from the perspective of why Time would choose him, but I do like him for the same reasons that you said, Andrea, and also that he is a bit of an all or nothing kind of he does go all in on things. So he sold out of PayPal and went all in on the Tesla one, and he takes big risks. Although I think he's a super smart guy. I mean, he's one of those sort of photographic. I don't know if he's got photo, but he's sort of, I don't know, Asperger's or something or other. He's super smart and works things out pretty quickly. And he went all in. The one I love that he did that I haven't really seen take off in a huge way was he made roof tiles photoelectric. So he basically, instead of putting a solar powered thing on top of your roof tiles, let's make the roof tiles solar powered, like a photoelectric. So then they were marketing that where and it looked beautiful, like a beautiful house, but the whole thing's run by electricity. And then when he went big into sort of crypto, that caused a bit of problems for those in crypto, because anytime he says anything, the market moves. But what he did do is when he realized that the amount of electricity that it was chomping down, he sort of said, okay, I'm not going to play here anymore until things get better.
Yeah,
You know,
and it needed someone like him to sort of bring that to the attention, because a lot of people were paying attention, but it wasn't really it wasn't a conversation that people were having. So I was happy with that, right? I'm not always happy with everything he says, but yeah.
Need to point out that the follow-up to that was, of course, Tesla figuring out that it costs more money to run the banking system and more electricity and more other stuff to run the banking system than Bitcoin. So just putting that one on the table.
Yeah,
I
like it.
Sometimes it feels as though billionaires feel they have the right to be self-contradictory. I mean, just think about it, right? Tesla, EVs, fantastic, the way possibly with the future, but not a lot of enthusiasm or talk from the billionaires about how do we process the waste of these things, as well as photovoltaic cells, because photovoltaic cells do not last forever. How do you process all that toxic silicon, or in the case of batteries, all that lithium? How do you recycle those? And those will come in by the ton load, basically, each car.
Well, that's why they're building rockets.
It's important for the billionaires to look behind and give other billionaires an opportunity to raise themselves by solving the problems that they create. It's a giving community.
Yeah. It's
All
a
right,
pay it forward in time.
Do you want to move on to COVID? You ready?
She said.
But last week we were talking about how quiet it was, especially in the media, which was a bit of a relief that they weren't trying to make news out of no news, because we were playing a waiting game. But I'm sure we can all see that's changed this week. It's a bit of a bam. It's all about COVID. So, but we're still not sure what we're dealing with. And based on what's happening in the UK, they don't believe that we'll know for sure the impact of Omicron until after Christmas, and that's hospitalizations and deaths. So we've still got a way to go. But if there's one thing we can all certainly take away, it's moving fast. So one of the articles I read was Omicron variant multiplies 70 times faster in airways than Delta. And I thought this is really interesting. So basically, this is its entrance into the airways, like, nostrils and stuff. And that's what's increasing its person-to-person spread. But the interesting part of this article was that it replicates 10 times more slowly than the original version of coronavirus. So I'm presuming they were talking way back at the beginning. And they believe that might contribute to less severe illness. So if that's the case, it's a good thing. But this research is under peer review, and we won't know what until that's happening. But basically, they've been talking about the tidal wave of Omicron washing over the UK. And this week, they recorded the highest number of daily COVID-19 cases since the beginning of the pandemic. And on Wednesday, it was 78,610 cases. The previous record was 68,053, which was on the 8th of January, when we really didn't have many people vaccinated, and the UK was still in lockdown. So it's moving fast, and the US is starting to take off too. The message from everyone is get your shot, get your booster, and remember it takes 2 weeks for it to go into effect. So if Omicron has arrived in your country and you haven't done it yet, don't delay. The other thing is we also saw the US has hit 800,000 deaths from COVID since the beginning, and that means 1 of every 100 older Americans has perished since the beginning of the crisis. Keep an eye on Portugal. They've got an 88% vaccine rate in everyone who can be fully vaccinated. Booster shots program is well underway as well. But that's one of those places where the world is watching, because based on what happens there, we'll have a better idea of what's going to happen around the world. But the sort of the overall messages that keep coming through, we've underestimated this virus since the beginning. Let's not make the same mistake again. Many of the scientists are saying, please take this seriously. This is probably the worst scenario we've been in since the pandemic began. And finally, we don't know yet. We still don't know. It's going to be a couple more weeks before we know how serious it is. So that's my overview of COVID for the week.
Yeah, I liked, there was an article, I think you shared an article about COVID booster shots increasing vaccine effectiveness. I think there was an article you shared. 75
to 78%, something like that.
Yeah, what was really interesting was some of in the key facts section at the end of that article, it said the following. So I'll just read them out. There was 5 of them. Among those who had received 2 doses of the the top line was COVID booster shots delivered 71 to 75% protection against mild COVID symptoms from the Omicron variant, according to a study by the UK Health Security Agency released on Friday. The other facts are, among those who had received 2 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine, a Pfizer-BioNTech booster increased the vaccine effectiveness against the Omicron variant to 71.4% 2 weeks after it was received. The figure was 75.5% for people whose primary dose was Pfizer itself, according to the study. 2 doses of Pfizer followed by Pfizer booster gave 92.6% protection against the Delta variant, while 2 doses of AstraZeneca followed by Pfizer booster yielded 93.8%, so even higher. The study analyzed around 550 people and nearly with Omicron and 56,500 Delta cases. Hasn't yet been peer-reviewed, like Andrea said. Excluded mixed primary doses. Insufficient data to estimate vaccine effectiveness of Moderna vaccines, the study said. Sounds to me like it's a Pfizer-backed study in a weird way. And the agency
but the Moderna CEO was quite somber in his predictions for the vaccine. Do you remember last week we were talking?
Yeah,
about
I remember that. And Pfizer was
So
happy with saying ours is awesome.
Yeah.
But the Moderna one was saying none of them can. I thought he was warning against. But anyway, Singapore government just put out something in the gov.sg sort of updates that we get with regards to this, saying, if you've had Pfizer, consider having Moderna as the booster because it helps by a bit more, boosts things up a bit. So the mix and match seems to be having some validity.
Well, in terms of the amount of antibody produced, the triple M combination seems to produce the highest load of antibodies. The question is about the effectiveness of the antibody. So the Moderna one creates a lot of antibodies, which may not be as effective. We don't know yet, but it may not be as effective against Omicron. That's the way it goes. So if you want quantity, then go for the Moderna to shore it all up. But as to whether or not it'll do the job well, hard to say.
But it's an interesting one, right? Because I think a lot of people get overwhelmed by this information. I've had 2 Sinovacs and then a Astra booster. I have no idea if that's any good at all.
The vaccine people are saying essentially is better than none. That's always the case. Whatever vaccine you have, that's the good vaccine. Get the best thing you can. Get it as much as you can get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I just recommend to everybody just really go and do your research. And J&J is basically being pushed aside now because of blood clot risks. So that was one of the ones that was going to be great because it didn't need to be stored in minus whatever temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
So that one's now being pushed to the side. So we've got the main ones left, but there's lots of information out there if you want to understand what the best one is.
I think many of the decisions being made now in terms of public constraints and whatever, they're largely political decisions. They're not medical decisions. The only governments I think should come close to complying with medical decisions, but making unpopular political decisions are like those in Singapore. Yeah. But look, in fact, we look at the spectrum, right? A number of Singaporeans who have died from COVID, about 1 in 7,000 since the crisis began. America, about 1 in 400. The evidence is pretty clear. It's not 200, 300, 400, but it's like quintuple, doubles, and triples of that to show that you take measures which are going to be seen by libertarians as constraints on your personal liberties, you will get a very low death rate per capita. Singapore is a classic example, right? If you don't, you go the other extreme, you get the situation you get in the US and the UK. So they aren't exactly paragons of medical efficiency. Second, I think is that it's becoming more transmissible. I'm not a virologist, but everything that we've known as lay people is that viruses can't mutate to kill people off quickly and a lot of people because that's not in their interest. The interest is that they want to propagate themselves. So my hunches as an educated layperson is that you're going to get higher transmissibility, but slightly lower, or about the same level of lethality. And even now we know a lot more. Look at the death rate, say in Singapore, right? It's like 0.2%. Now, that's not the same everywhere in the world, but 0.2% is twice the death rate of, say, the flu. So it sounds very bad. My God, it's twice as deadly as the flu. But take a look. It's 0.2%. So it's still relatively low if you are talking about in the Singapore context. So again, I think you really have to keep some perspective about how dangerous this thing is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Twice as deadly as the flu, because obviously, like you were saying, in the US, that those numbers are significant. 1 in 100 adults over 65 have died since the beginning. So that's very, very high numbers. And right from the word go, it's 10 times more lethal than the flu in the countries where it got out of control. But then on the other side, I know that Singapore's been a pretty tough place to be, like it still is, right? You still can only be out with 5 people, right?
Yeah, so I'm just going to throw a bit of caution here, because in terms of using statistics and saying therefore this is equivalent to that, you have to also take into account starting points. So like the numbers for Sweden, for instance, right? They talked about how the way they did their stuff. It turned out in terms of mortality, and this is very popular amongst the people who said let's not have too many restrictions, saying that in terms of excess mortality, there was very little difference between before COVID struck and after COVID had been around for a while, and so the conclusion that many people took from that was therefore it doesn't make that much of a difference. But Singapore starts from a different place than the rest of the world as well, right? I mean, if you did some analysis, you might find there might be some correlation to obesity. You might find there's a correlation to some other aspects as well. So our baseline level of healthcare and health quality in Singapore actually is very significant, so that we didn't have as much exposure as well on the other end. Because one of the biggest things that made you susceptible to COVID was some sort of poor health indicator in the first place, right? Yeah. So we actually had much better numbers in that way. So I am a little bit concerned about the correlating the data from one to the other. I mean, when someone put the Sweden numbers in front of me, and I said, do you really want to live in a world that starts off being that bad? I can't remember the number right now, but
I do, Joe. I do. But basically, Sweden's almost exactly double the population of Singapore, right? But I think they've got like 50,000. So if we adjust our population, right, we would have about, say, 1,500 deaths from COVID since the beginning. Sweden's around 15,000. You just do it. That's 10 times. That's not one. Yeah.
But I think to Joe's point, the comparison for Sweden isn't Singapore. It's the neighboring countries of Sweden, like Denmark, where they were well less than 50% of what Sweden suffered, and similar lifestyle, similar health, similar age groups. Then you go across into Africa, where there's younger populations. In Asia, a lot more younger populations. You go to America, where there's more obesity, more diabetes, all those sort of things. So, yeah, the apples to apples comparison has never been right.
But there was something in the article that one about the 70% faster replication in airways and 10% slower in the lungs. That article also talked about asymptomatic infections, which is people spreading it, wandering around spreading it all over the place without having the symptoms of COVID, right? And it was 46% in North America, 44% in Europe, and 28% in Asia. And my first question to myself was, well, why is that? And we can see it on television. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, everybody's running around without masks on in Europe and America, either in America declaring their freedom and in Europe saying they want to go to the football. And in Asia, where everyone's just listening to what they're told to do for their own safety, which is wear a mask. And so ours is 28%. And then the recommendation out of the article is we recommend that you screen people for asymptomatic COVID, like asymptomatic COVID. You screen people and you quarantine them the same as you would with somebody who's got COVID. And that's exactly what happens here in Singapore. So I go play footballs on Sundays, which is detrimental to my health a few days afterwards. But I go play football on Sundays, and before I can play football, I'm sitting there doing the ART test with everybody else who's about to play, and we have to show them before we're allowed to go in. And we're doing that exactly for that. We're screening for asymptomatic COVID before we go and play. My daughter has to do it before she goes to school after some time off, or if there's some sort of scare. That's exactly what we're doing. But if we're sort of sitting there with a placard and chanting why we shouldn't be doing it, and we have, it's impinging on my freedom, to wear a mask? I mean, I don't really think so. I think it impinges on our freedom to not wear one.
Yeah.
And the fact that we can move around and enjoy ourselves. Huh?
I also don't want to paint the whole of Europe with the "we want freedom" thing, because in the article you shared about Portugal, one of the stories I love in there was this older woman who was talking about how when they go out, they all wear the mask because life is too precious, you know. And I thought that's it's an attitude towards that, to realize that you're preserving the good thing, so you can have more life.
I love it. I love it. Instead of I demand my freedom to die whenever it happens.
In Portugal, I love the story of the retired general who came in and started using Darth Vader and the Seth as people. You're either with us, we're at war with the virus, and if you're not at war with the virus, then you're against us. I thought that was fascinating, and apparently he's been brilliantly successful. But also the commentary around, they remember that in Portugal they remember, you know, the time when I mean, first of all, they got hammered by the first round of COVID. But secondly, they also, the wealth in Portugal's only been a recent thing. So they remember the times when people did die, when they didn't have the right healthcare system, when they couldn't vaccinate their children against normal diseases. So yeah, it's a really interesting perspective. I thought there one on Portugal, but the general's cool.
The only problem I have with the general is that Darth Vader and all the stormtroopers wear masks, and the rebels don't. So I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, fair enough. He's going good versus evil. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, different cultures, different things work. All right, so let's move on to the environment. So just a couple of things. The first one is there's been a report released by the Monetary Authority of Singapore that basically studies the exposure of Singapore's banks and insurers to climate-related transition risks. They found that nearly a third of the country's financial assets are vulnerable, and that's about the same as Europe. They also found that climate change could emerge as a threat to global financial stability within the next 3 to 5 years. So it's really, really close. And we've been talking about it, and I know a lot of people still think it's a long way away. We're knocking down its door. The sectors most exposed to these risks include, obviously, fossil fuels, utilities, energy-intensive manufacturing, housing, transport, and agriculture. I mean, you guys are all based in Singapore, but I do think the Singapore government is paying incredible attention to what's going on around the world as far as climate goes, and is preparing Singapore as best it can. But yeah, I found that a really interesting report. And the 3 to 5 years was, you know, we've got some intense times coming up.
Yeah.
Did you guys have a look?
Yeah, I read that article. There's a second part to the article as well, which is pretty close to my heart. It's how the other major threat to economies is crypto. But I don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
But with regards to the environment, you know, Singapore's always known as this conservative, you know, a country that approaches things conservatively. And I think in terms of financial positioning, we try to work on this idea of not being too leveraged. And I think what people forget sometimes is you can be leveraged on things that you don't realize that the leverage is built on. And so the awareness of how climate change is going to affect all the underlying assets on which a lot of leverage is based is what's coming to the fore this time. And that's really what people are beginning to realize as they begin to look at, you know, 2 or 3 steps beyond the next step. So if I'm looking at derivative, there's nothing here. I look at the one beyond that, I go like, and then eventually I come to something which is going to be affected by the environment, and perhaps not directly as well. I think part of that, I think what we take away from the report sometimes is what we want to see from it as well. We think that therefore they are worried about the environment. It may not totally be that. It may also be about attitudes towards the environment that will affect those underlying assets. So, you know, like when they talk about how oil and gas may be affected, it's more the popularity of it. It's how, you know, it may no longer be a viable sector because it's no longer popular, right? You can't be that asshole anymore, right?
Yeah. But the stranded assets have been talked about a lot in the last few months in particular. And just the economic fallout from that's just going to be,
yeah,
it's going to be catastrophic.
Now, if you've got a loan that's based on getting oil out of the ground, it's not as good, a form of surety as before.
Yeah. Anyone else? No. All right. So
I found with that one that the banks, the thing that was interesting there is that the banks have 30% of their loans were extended to those sectors.
Yeah.
And that roughly the same as European Union banks. So the exposure there is who they're lending money to. And from the green side's been trying to say, don't lend money to these places because that's going to make it more difficult for them to do the destructive stuff that they're doing. But if this is saying that those sectors are vulnerable and as a result, maybe don't lend money to them, then there's obviously a requirement now to look at what sectors we should be lending money to.
Yeah.
And starting to shift that loan ratio, I suppose. And as a result, that's going to be interesting. But I don't think use of oil is going away anytime soon. So the reality is, but what would be most interesting to me is a huge and concerted argument on subsidies that are provided. Because if we stopped providing the subsidies to oil and gas, we're really creating a platform where you can actually compare apples with apples. Oh, oil and gas is so cheap, that's why we use it. Is it? We are providing huge subsidies, but there is a massive industry, even in Singapore. We have a massive refining industry here, a transportation industry of oil and gas. So it is it's...
Some of our best fires are based on oil and gas.
I beg your pardon?
No, some of our worst and biggest industrial fires are based on oil and gas.
Which is why we put everything out on an island somewhere. But
yeah.
But it's still a big part of the economy. So, but Singapore, if you look at Singapore's history, Singapore's been very, very good at going, that's not going to work anymore soon. So let's just switch to this. And Singapore certainly used to do it. I mean, it was a little bit more easier to do it. One guy saying that's what we're going to do, and then everyone who did it. But yeah, Singapore's been good at that. So it's one to watch.
It certainly is. Hey, so we were missing our messages. So there's a message which says Facebook user, but I'm going to presume it's Philip Merry. Not sure, Andrea, I have a 31-year-old Mercedes. So there you go. But Avni's joining us. Hello, Avni. And I'm presuming it's Dr. Phil. So hi, Phil. And Si Biao Tuan. Do you know her? Him? Can't see. Anyway, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. So, yeah, interesting times ahead. We'll keep an eye on those chats. But the other headline from an environment perspective that Joe mentioned earlier is the Arctic heat record, which basically says is like the Mediterranean. So, last June 2020, there was a day in a Siberian town where it hit 38 degrees Celsius, which is 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And in this article, it's sounding alarm bells over the climate, Earth's changing climate. And so this has been officially verified by the World Meteorological Organization, basically a year and a half later. And it's 18 degrees Celsius higher than the average daily temperature for this region. It's also the first time that the agency has included the Arctic Circle in its archive of extreme weather reports. So it's a verification of something that happened a long time ago, but it's a huge concern. Like it's what's going on up there.
I mean, this thing has been going on for decades, right? I mean, as a mountaineer, right, you only have to look at photographs of glaciers from the 1920s, 30s, or even in 1990s, right? I got photographs of the glaciers in the French Alps, and you compare them with what the glaciers look like now. Just like 25, 30 years later, you can see the glacial recession has been incredible. And that has a huge impact because 1/3 or more of the world's freshwater supplies are locked up in snow and ice in the Great Mountains. And having them melt away has a tremendous environmental impact, not only on the populations that live in the mountains and the regions, but also the downstream aspect, right, in terms of how it impacts the flow of fresh water into the rivers and so on into the sea. That's where you can see it happening in the last few decades. But I'm a little bit more pessimistic as to change. It can't happen overnight. It's going to be really painfully gradual, right? Like the pain of changing is, once the pain of changing is exceeded by the pain of not changing, then you'll see some change. And I think it's going to happen very slowly. It isn't helped, of course, when suddenly you discover things in the last decade like fracking, right? Oh, we can now squeeze oil from tar sands that we didn't have the technology to do so 20 years ago, and then it just keeps on kicking the can further down the road. So I'm generally a bit pessimistic about ultimate change. I see internal combustion engine cars and things like that still being around in 20 years' time, simply because it's going to take at least a generation to change. So people can scream and kick and say, "What did we change?" And they have absolutely no idea. It's like the rhinoceros hide. It's going to take ages for it to change.
And you just imported an internal combustion engine.
Exactly.
Yeah. But here's the difference. I can only drive it for 45 days in a year. See?
Okay, that's because it doesn't work at the moment.
So Philip mentioned he's got a 30-year-old Mercedes. Yeah, that's great. I think ultimately it's not so much about ownership of these kind of vehicles or engines. It's about how much you use them, right? Or if you do that, for example, how often do you travel with these things, right?
Yeah.
So,
So
David,
I'm going to throw this out about the idea of the combustion engine and how people talk about how it's easy, that it's probably going to be around for a while. People in Nokia felt pretty certain about their phone business as well until things suddenly changed on them. And the real big difference is going to be basically this: if the electric propulsion system can come to a place where its price it's going to be amazing. So if you think about your mobile phones, right? What has expanded its ability is processing power, battery life, that combination, right? Because you now have so much ability to carry so much power with you, both in terms of actual electrical power and in terms of processing power. That has changed the way, like even the internet, the way it's been accessed, right? For the longest time, it was all about desktops. But when that flip happened, it became all about mobiles. So I think what's going to happen is, and what I'm hoping will happen is, the technology for cars is going to leapfrog. There has to be some way electrically, or even maybe just, if some guy who's thinking hard about this enough and figures out a way to make an atomic car, like Back to the Future, I think that would be fantastic. That would be fantastic. You could for a while say I'm gonna stick to my combustion engine because it still works and it's about the same price. But if you came up to me with a car like a Tesla and it costs half the price of a BMW that runs on fuel, there is no competition. It's gonna edge it out, right?
But I'm going to say something very contrarian here, right? One reason why a lot of people like the classic cars is simply this: the driving experience is completely different. The sensory feedback you get is completely different. And frankly speaking, if you look at electric cars of any brand, right, they're just deathly boring. Yeah, they're powerful, they're fast, but they're just deathly boring when you sit in them, basically. There's no feedback. There's no immediate feedback to the driving experience. Why do people fly World War I biplanes, for example? It's a different sensation and experience. So it's more than just moving from A to B. If you're talking A to B, the way to go is electric. But
I agree with you completely, David. But if you talk about things like cigar smoking, right? I recognize it's a nice sensory thing. It's very hardcore. It's very deep. It's all the stuff you want about is tingling the senses and all that. But it's not necessarily popular.
Yeah, I would argue that 99.999% of people don't fly biplanes. But at the same time, I really get David's point. David's point is about, it's a Marie Kondo of driving. Does it spark joy? And it is sparking joy. Even fiddling with the car is sparking joy. So there is an element of the sensory experience and experiential aspect to it all that is what makes life worth living. Although there is a generation that would prefer to be on their phone and then driving the car.
Let me put to you another idea, right? Sorry, this is a crazy idea, right? But if Apple ever got into the car business, I would bet what they would do was they would create a lot of features in there which had nothing to do with moving the car forward, but to give you those things that make the joy of driving, so to speak, come alive. You'd have sensory feedback coming through that was meaningless at all, but it was good for the user experience. You have it. You actually have it right now already in some of the BMWs as well. I think BMWs or Audi, I can't remember who it is, where they literally play the sound of an engine through the system, because that's what brings joy.
You mean it's like having real sex and virtual sex kind of thing, right? And now they're trying to amp that up.
Wait a minute. Well, we went to cigars and ended up at sex. That was only a Freudian possibility. But I get the Apple thing. They create meaningless things to give us the sensory experience of driving. So we're going to have haptic touch steering wheels that don't actually steer the thing.
Yeah,
but just to move beyond this conversation a little bit. So basically, in Europe, it's gone well past 30% of new cars are electric vehicles. Someone here, so it only says Facebook users, so I can't see who's posted it. It says hydrogen will take the lead, but I've been recently reading some stuff around hydrogen that it's a real cult and that it's nowhere near going to be part of the story in the future. So there's some different opinions on that, but what David was saying back at the beginning is that, the change is going to be slow. The change can't be slow. And the biggest risk we've got is new cars across Asia, right? It doesn't matter how many Europeans move to electric vehicles if everybody in Asia moves to combustion engines. That just from a numbers perspective, it's going to be chaotic. And we've seen those photos of Beijing in the 70s and 80s when everyone's on their bikes to now where it's just back-to-back traffic. So, Thwaites Glacier, so the Doomsday Glacier. So the scientists should be back there now, I'm presuming, based on this time of year. And they think that by the time they come out, that they will have a much better idea. So basically, once that breaks off and goes into the ocean, when you were talking about how you think it's going to all happen slowly, that could be rapid. The Himalayas have already passed the tipping point, so that's going to melt no matter what. And we know that there's more than 2 billion people at the bottom of that relying on the water from that. So I don't know if it's going to be slow, David. From what I've been reading, I think it's going to be a lot faster and a lot more horrifying. And the climate refugees that are going to come out of it are going to overwhelm the world. And that's going to be the start of some pretty big stuff. But
there's a great thought to take away from that, right? What was that great saying? The electric light bulb was designed under candlelight.
Yeah.
We're still going to use fossil fuels for at least, I see, the foreseeable decade, 2 decades at least, basically. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Just the whole plastic production from the fossil fuel industry, they're banking on it so that they can keep their businesses going. So there's no question we're going to have the oil and gas industry into the future. It's just about, we've just got to scale it down wherever we can, as quickly as we can. So, and if we don't, we know what's coming, right? Well, we don't really know what's coming. But it will be gradual, but it will also be faster than people think.
Yeah, I want someone to come along with that technology. It's going to be able to fit on the back of a car, so that as you drive, furniture comes out of the back of it. It just converts it and uses it in the more useful way.
Yeah, but don't worry. Look, I think we're definitely getting the message as far as the environment crisis goes, because the super yacht industry is booming, and Gina Reinhardt, the lovely lady, is annoyed that basically the marinas in Australia can't deal with super yachts, and a super yacht is more than 50 meters long. So just so you know, the average billionaire has a carbon footprint thousands of times that of the average person. So, and people keep making that point, that the non-billionaires, there's billions of us too, and even though we might not have the same size of footprint, there's lots of us with a sizable footprint, and we've all got to bring it down, especially if we're in the wealthier countries. So let's hope we get the message one day, right?
Yeah. When I get my super yacht, I might change my mind, but they're still planning on building it. I'm going to import it like David did 30 years later. The super yacht one is one it always confuses me when I go to marinas and see them there. I'm just like, what do these people do? I'd just be interested to know what they do for a living. But anyway, presumably oil and gas.
Well,
Yeah.
and very recently trading.
Yeah. There's a lot of them here.
Oops, excuse me.
All right, you ready to move on?
Yep.
So in my weekend reads, I'm going to share a speech by Maria Reza, who's one of the Filipino journalists that got the Nobel Peace Prize. And she delivered a speech. It's less than 20 minutes, and it's one of the most powerful speeches I think I've ever watched. Did you guys have a chance to have a look at it?
Yeah. Thanks very much for, it wasn't for the homework. Sometimes I wouldn't get around to clicking on these things.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the best 15 minutes I've spent because I tend to play at 1.25, but it's a good speech.
You're a 1.25er. Yeah, so definitely watch it. But just before we go into our theme, I wanted to just sort of mention there's LinkedIn's published an article called 29 Big Ideas That Will Change Our World in 2022. It's the time of year where everyone loves publishing this stuff. I find most of it very, very tedious. And for a long time now, I haven't participated. But I thought there were some interesting pieces. So there's 3 predictions. One is brace yourself for season 2 of the Great Reshuffle, which is obviously talking about millions of people have left their jobs. They're looking at different ways of working. One of the biggest opportunities in the future, if you're looking for a job opportunity, if you want, or going to university, career counselling as a profession looks like it's going to be a booming industry. Another one, frontline employees will enjoy new clout, and this is based on the story that Amazon has tripled its offering to the seasonal workers who sign up. And then the 4-day work week will become a competitive advantage. And they're again talking about the Great Resignation. All of these predictions, which I'm seeing a lot of, there's another perspective to this that's being discussed as well, which I don't think it gets as much attention. So basically the message is the employees are in the driver's seat for the first time in a long time. So people are being paid more. There's better opportunities in the jobs. And so there's a lot of advice around it, right? But every time this has happened in the past, it doesn't take long before the employers get the control back. And one of the predictions is, if you can't get the people, you work out other ways to do the work, and that's obviously automation, robotics, offshoring, sending it to somewhere else. So I think look at this advice with careful eyes and just sort of take care of yourself, because there's different parts to this story that I don't think are being communicated. And I think a lot of people will make a decision based on the trend and might get hurt when it sort of rolls out. What about you guys? What did you pick up?
Well, on this particular topic, and this is what's happened because of friction. It's because of the inability of workforces to run from one place to another that leads to this inability or inflexibility in terms of who you can hire, right? So that has made the worker more powerful. So I've been hearing stories, and unverified, by the way, but I've been hearing stories where they give you a chance to win a phone, or I think it was an iPhone or something like that, to show up for an interview at McDonald's. But this was in the U.S., right? They're so short on staff, they need to get people in. I think what was interesting about it is they need to think a little bit about what's going to happen post-COVID once things become easy again. Once we go back to moving around, does that change the way we'll do things? Also, in terms of how, like you said, the companies are going to figure out different things. I've really come to enjoy working from home. I'm doing more things and achieving more things from home than I've ever done before, and I'd be loath to go back to something where I can only get to do one thing because that's all the time I have for it, right? So I think there's a lot of that happening as well. People are figuring that they can make a go of it because they've had to make a go of it, and that's to me, that's what I took away from that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
All right. Yeah. I mean, there were 29 items there, and the one that actually really that I caught my attention was the one called self-maintenance of your own hotel room. Now they call it a trend, right? But it's been around for quite a while, especially in countries which have a chronic labor shortage. So like in Japan, three years ago when I was there for a ski trip, we stayed in a mid-range type of hotel. And what the hotel did was they actually rewarded you the more nights that you stayed in which you did not require a change of linen. Now let's face it, right? In many 5-star hotels you've been to at all, they change it every day, whether or not they need to, and whether the person staying there for just 3 days, they still change it every day. Think about the amount of fresh water it takes to wet a large 600 yan count bed sheet, and not even including the detergent that is used to clean it. Now imagine more and more people elected to do that. Now this hotel in Japan, what it did was this: if let's say you're there for 5 days and you chose not to have your sheets changed in 5 days, they would reward you with little points and things like that, which you could go downstairs and you could trade it for small items from a little shop they had there, which is fantastic. Basically, small meal counters, a beer coupon or something like that. And I think it's a wonderful idea because in the hotel industry, the sheer amount of what I consider unnecessary washing, sheer amount of unnecessary use of detergents, the whole downstream impact on demands on fresh water, on downstream filtration of detergents into the waterways, right? It's amazing. So it's a small shift, but in a very strategic area if this was adopted globally, yeah? So that really caught my attention. So it's not new, but hopefully it's going to be a more popular trend.
Yeah, I agree. Tim?
I was going to mention something that Joe had said, but I've forgotten immediately what it was. Oh, the great reshuffle. So I've been talking to people in Australia, and they were saying that the problem in Australia at the moment is that it's fully employed and it's hard to find people. And so this is going on with what you were talking about with regards to that shift. I think that particular trend is very hugely linked. And one thing we haven't seen is the big link with the fact that crypto stopped us traveling. There is a huge migrant worker population that moves around the world. And
I think you meant COVID stopped us traveling.
COVID, what did I say stopped it?
Crypto.
Crypto, I meant COVID. COVID stopped the traveling. So COVID stopped everybody traveling about. The crypto thing is the last thing I saw on the screen. And as a result, that they're not available to people. And what Andrea said is sort of necessity is the mother of invention. People will work out ways to be able to do it. But the places that relied on sort of student tourism in a big way was the grape growing and fruit picking industries in Australia, and they're really suffering because those people aren't migrating and moving about. And that's just a small example. In the professional world, there's lots of people coming in and doing like the temporary workforce is they're all getting secured into full-time positions. So that ability to piano accordion your workforce in accordance with demand is kind of gone because those populations aren't coming in. And because those populations usually take up the lower end of the job spectrum, usually because they're willing to sort of accept anything. They're not there. So locals, they're required to take on locals. What can happen is a bunch of different things. Prices just go through the roof. But also when COVID, not crypto, when COVID sorts of releases travel again, that particular trend may not be a trend so much anymore because then you've got that population moving again. And travel is the big rubber band at the moment where there's so much pent-up demand ready to be released. Myself, I just bought a ticket to, I don't know whether that's the trouble with buying tickets for travel at the moment. I don't know whether the travel will actually materialize in the end, but just bought a ticket to Australia to visit my parents for the first time in a couple of years. And for $750 on Singapore Airlines, which is just amazing return trip. Mm-hmm. And there's this interesting opportunity. There's this interesting, huge demand waiting to go, but there's also a global workforce that is, their psychology may have changed, but there's a global workforce that may start to move. So
I think the global workforce is poised to move, but it's going to move for very different reasons than what it might do before. I think what COVID done is given you enough time to stay still for a while and begin to really think about things. As in, like, I think 3 months or 2 months into COVID, you're going like, oh, the moment I get a chance to get out, I'm going to go and do something there or whatever it is, right? But if you're
Yeah,
2 years
take
into it
time.
and you begin to think a little bit more about what you really want to do, I mean, we have a friend, we have someone in APSS as well, Sean, right? I mean, Sean's basically said, I'm going to do what I really want to do, and he is in Vietnam right now with a startup. You know, he's left Singapore, gone to Vietnam, and now with the answer to the question, you know, when are you coming back? Don't know, right? But that's the kind of choice that he made because, well, things are what they are right now, and he's had a chance to think about it, really think about it, and experience it, and go like, okay, that's what I'm doing.
Hello, Joe. There's somebody here on this screen that's been living the nomadic lifestyle for many, many years. And I started the journey in 2006. In 2009, I moved to Phuket for the first time and figured we just need an internet connection at an international airport. A little bit too early. But, you know, like I'm looking at all the predictions, and it's something that my husband Steve and I agreed years ago that that's the life that we wanted to have, not anchored into a place, you know. And I do think people will hopefully have the courage to sort of step out and live these different lives because they are available to us. But I was in Boston during the .com boom and the .com bust, and in the boom time, and it was incredible being there at that time. All this arrogance started to come to the surface, and then when the crash happened, it just destroyed people's lives because they weren't paying attention. And I think a lot of the information that's coming out is it's too one-sided, and I don't think everyone's looking at the whole story. We need to move towards automation and robotics. We need to do that, right? But how are we going to take care of the population if we do that? Because then we could potentially go towards a dystopia, right? We want to be a utopia, so we need to start planning for things like a universal basic income and recreating our societies so that business can move forward and modernize, but we can also have different lives that, you know, we haven't had before. So anyway, I just thought it's a really interesting conversation. Another thing that in that article, Richard Branson was quoted, "I hope 2020 will be the year that business leaders..." No worries. Gesundheit. "The business leaders and entrepreneurs everywhere will learn to speak up on the issues that should matter to all of us. Where business leaders raise their voice and stand shoulder to shoulder with others, real change can happen." So for me, that was the most important message in the entire article, because that's basically, if we don't do that in 2022, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, when you were talking about the world changing and moving towards a different dystopian life or utopian life, I thought you were going to bridge it to a nice introduction to David, really, and the idea of retirement, because it really looked like we were heading that way. Might this be? I'm not sure whether we're done with the news. We can. Shall we go to David and talk about this? Because I'm getting to the point where I feel like retiring.
Oh, are you?
Are you retiring a car, or what are we talking about? Retiring cars or retiring?
Or t-shirts.
I love your t-shirt, Dave.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Joe.
So happy to have David here with us this week. I mean, David's a big. He's one of those people I talk with a lot and share things with a lot on social media because he's paying attention. Although he told me when I asked him to come on that he's not paying as much attention to the news as he used to, but David's moved into semi-retirement, and from what I'm seeing, you've been busier than you've ever been with work. So I just thought it'd be really interesting for us to hear, you know, because you've taught all of us about negotiation in our profession. I know that you talk a lot about finance and investing and property and all sorts of stuff, but I just wanted to just hear, you know, what are the plans? What did you do to get ready? What would you advise our audience, like if they're starting to think towards that? And then think about what we've just been talking about from a climate perspective. There's some risks coming up in the future that, I don't know, are people paying attention to it, especially from an investment perspective? So I'll just hand it over to you.
Right. So I'm not sure where to start with it. So you're right. I'm officially in a permanent state of semi-retirement. That was since December 2019. And that's when I did one of the best keynote sessions for a large corporate event in Bali. Beautiful day, beautiful location. Audience laughed when they should have been laughing. All right. So all the buttons all pressed nicely. And I thought, you know what? Now is the right time to actually publicly announce that you are officially semi-retired. And so this is it. So this is the public declaration of a journey that began 12 years earlier. And that journey began with a beer in a bar in Johannesburg, believe it or not, with my fellow professional speaker, Frank Furness. And we were talking about the business and everything. And then he said something which was really interesting. He said, David, the problem about people in our profession, that is the profession of topic experts who speak, train, consult to earn their living. He said the problem with people in our profession is that very few of us have developed a good exit strategy. And that got us thinking, because at some stage in our lives, we're going to either want to stop doing what we're doing, because either we stop liking it, we get tired of it, or worse, some health issue in our family or in ourselves causes us to stop doing it. And when that happens, really, the tap runs dry, right? When most of your income comes from being paid to go somewhere to deliver some wisdom or something personally, and most of us have that kind of business structure, it's just us being the content expert and maybe one or two assistants or support people. Where do you go from there? And straight away, I knew. I was already on a journey, but it really focused a high amount of intentionality into not creating a sequence where you can retire early. The hot word these days is FIRE, right? FIRE, financial independence, retire early, right? I was heading in that direction. So I think the focus is so much retirement. I think the focus is so much about getting financially independent quickly. So you then have options. It's not about stopping work. It's about having the option of not working, or having the option where if for some reason your main source of income stops for some reason, you have other sources of income that can actually continue to help you maintain your lifestyle and your intentions in living without you needing to do anything more. So that really got me going. So I think from around 2007, I said, okay, here's my intentionality that we will be, as my wife and I, financially independent before I turn 50. So I reached that at 49. So why did I take another 6 years before I declared I was semi-retired? Because I think I was enjoying the travel, the business, the fees and everything. It was great. But I knew by the time I was 50, something would happen to make me stop speaking for fees, and life would continue as per normal. And I think it really begins with intentionality. Take a look at your lifestyle. What do you need to maintain that? And then where do you need to go? What do you need to do to get you that kind of income from multiple sources, so that if anything happens to your main source of income, you can still carry on as per normal. So I think it has to start with it. It has to start with a plan, intentionality, keeping it simple. And of course, on the investment side, diversifying, right? Diversifying, as mentioned, not putting all your eggs in one country, one basket, one asset class, for example. And I think that's the way to go. It's about being sensible about it. It's not about not being too greedy about it, right? And in terms of sustainability too, right? You got to understand that as you get older, the world's becoming a more volatile place. Where are you going to put your nest eggs? Where are you going to put your energies to get the kind of income into what I call your state of semi-retirement, and eventually retirement, right, where you really don't want to do any more economically profitable kind of work. And so that's why. So I think emotionally, Andrea, from that point, looking at emotionally, it hasn't been that easy a journey, because I found it quite hard to switch off. Meaning I found it quite hard to give up stuff, to turn away work, for example. It's become easier over the last 2 years, and it's much easier now for me to say no. But initially, it was difficult, because you think, wow, like shy chase this deal kind of thing. Oh, I really want this gig kind of thing. And eventually you realize, you just have to let it go. Just let it go. And you begin to take the almost like Buddhist sense of disinterestedness in the money aspect, because technically you don't really need it anymore, basically. And once you get some kind of emotional reconciliation with that, I think that's where you really are on the path of mental freedom from that journey you've been on for the last 30 years. And you're truly in a happy state of FIRE, financial independence, retire early kind of thing. So yes, I intend, and I'm still keeping really busy. In fact, too busy this month. But yeah, it's about adjustment. So the last year and a half has been quite a lot of adjustments for me to make.
Yeah, right. So I suppose that's where am I coming back
Let
from?
me see if I'm echoing. Am I echoing too? No, it's just you.
All right, but I'm not echoing now, right?
No, I think it might have been a mute to unmute thing.
So I think it's the message is like once you've made the decision, it's not just an overnight thing. It's a gradual process because I'm you talk about some of those earlier times where ego's still in the way, right? Letting go. You've been a star on stage for so many years, right? But I remember you came to visit us in Phuket just before the pandemic began, and you were telling me like you were letting your hair go grey for the first time as well. Which I know in Asia a lot of men dye their hair to keep it for some reason. It's a real trend, but that was also part of your liberation too, right? And I know it sounds silly, but it was part of your liberation.
It's a small thing like that. I think you really need to have intentionality and also the kind of lifestyle that you want. Because if you really want a high roller lifestyle because you have a high roller type of income, that's great. But understand that that's not going to bring you to the state of fire sooner. It's going to make you need to work a lot longer before you get to that stage. And now I've got 3 friends who are down with cancer. Some with cancer that's actually doesn't have a very good 5-year prognosis at all. My father passed away 2 years ago. So he suddenly begin to realize is that if you're intelligent, smart, and you're talented in some way, you can always make money. But you can never, ever buy a single hour of time in your life. And that's when you get to really focus, wow, I have so little time. I think the best story was I was told, again, it was in South Africa, but not 10 years ago, but more recently, where a friend, Nick French, you may know Nick French. Remember Nick French, Tim?
Yeah.
He told me a story about this. He heard about the cake, right? So he said, imagine your life is like a cake and divide the cake into 8 slices. Take away 2 slices. The 2 slices you take away, the 8 slices represent about 80 years. So each slice is about 10 years. So you take away 2 slices because for the first 10 years of your life, you're just a kid. You don't really know what's going on. Then take away a second slice because that's your last 10 years in which maybe your health and other issues don't really make the last 10 years a very pleasant final 10 years of your existence. So now you're left with 6 slices, 60 years representing your most productive, enjoyable portion of your life. How many slices have you done? How many slices have you consumed? How many are left? And when you suddenly realize how many slices are left, that really gets you thinking, doesn't it?
I'm stuck on how many slices on the cake. There's 8.
Yes.
8 slices on the cake. The first 2 slices are gone because you're a kid.
Yeah, you take that. Now you just take out 2 slices in here. The 2 slices represent your first 10 years and the last 10 years of your life.
Oh, but there's only 10 years as a kid. Okay, I've been 40 years as a kid.
So you got 2 slices left, Tim.
Yeah, I think I've only got 2 slices left.
Yeah.
So that again, stories that get you really thinking, right?
Maybe 3. Yeah.
No, I ate one of the slices.
Well, you know how I've been doing all that work with healthy longevity and all the stuff that's coming that way, right? What's really upsetting is there's going to be maybe not upsetting, but what could be disrupting is you could be getting a new slice of cake. You could be getting a whole new cake. You could need cake to last a whole lot longer, as well. So it's really changed my perspective on things because it used to be I really thought that I was running out of time, and then I began to realize that I really had so much time even on the regular clock. And when I do this stuff with healthy longevity right now and what they're working on, you really have to start planning for a little bit further than you thought.
Oh yeah. Definitely. I think a good way to look at it is this. Take a look at the last 4 years of your life. Average out how much money you've been spending, not needing or what, spending in the last 3 or 4 years on average, right? Now, think about how many more years you have to live. For some reason, if you could liquidate all your assets, turn it into pure cash, stick it in a big biscuit tin, how much would that cash pile last you? Now, if the number gets you to around 96, 97, 98 years old, you're in a pretty good position to do fire right now, in that sense, yeah. If you're way, way, way behind, right, then I wouldn't say you're in trouble, but I think you need to do a lot more thinking and work on the financial part of it, actually. Either looking at how you're spending. I think a great tool I applied was every time I would spend anything more than, say, $1,000, I'd ask myself this, okay, how does buying this help me get to financial independence before I'm 50? So, this is a wonderful yardstick. If I spend anything that's about $1,000 a month, right, how would buying this make me get financially independent by the time I'm 50? It's a good touchstone to apply.
Did you ever make up an answer?
Oh, God, I really want this. I don't need it, but I really want it.
I really need to have this new iPhone because what will my retirees friends think?
I'm pretty fortunate that my wife and I have had a lifestyle that, apart from a few nice holidays a year, it hasn't changed a lot in 20 years. But the business has been really, really good for the last 10, 15 years. So that really, in a sense, sets you up for fire. There's some people I know in my family where they get a salary, they change jobs and their salary doubles. But what they do, they straight away get a mortgage that's 3 times their previous one. So bigger house, right, but bigger mortgage. So it really depends on the kind of lifestyle you want. But I can tell you one thing again, right? You can never make another hour of time. You can always make.
Interesting. I guess I should stop spending on AppSumo then.
Stop recommending it to me.
I know. I just it's my little addiction now. But okay, interesting. That's really interesting. So what do you think what do you think the multiple is, David?
The multiple?
Based on where somebody is now, what are they going to need?
All right. Okay.
A lot depends on where they are and what they're spending and what their lifestyle level is and how long they have left, I suppose. But
I think a good benchmark is a 3% benchmark on it, which means you take a look at your so-called your retirement or your nest egg you're building for retirement, and take a look at it. Okay, currently based on averages, right? If you're taking out roughly 2.5% to 3% a year, what happens then is that, first of all, can you live an enjoyable life that's similar to what you're living now, with inflation included, on that 3% a year? That's a good start. That is a good start. And then if not, ask yourself, how old are you at that particular given stage? Because there's a way where you can maintain your quality of life, but what happens is that if that 3% isn't enough, you increase that to say 4%, but understand you're running down the principal sum. Now, if you don't have children that you want to leave a legacy to, that's fine. But so that's one way. One way is that where you just have a totally sustainable fund. That means you could live indefinitely on 3% on X dollars, right? That's a happy place to be. Because if anything happens to you, right, that principal is still left there, say, for your children, for an inheritance, a legacy, charities. But for some reason, you have no interest in that and you have no dependence. Then one way to actually maintain that lifestyle that you want, although you don't have that, you can't get that from 3% of your existing pile of funds, is that you start taking the principal. You start eating the principal, knowing that by the time you're 100 and 102, that will all be gone. So ideally, you wind up, on your deathbed with $5 in the pocket, and that's in a perfect kind of world in calculations, right? We can't always predict how long we'll live, obviously, how much money we'll need, but that's one very simple yardstick. Take a look at your retirement fund. Look at 3% of that. Is that 3% enough to sustain you, basically, on top of any other streams of income coming in, basically? Yeah. So that's a good way to start.
All right.
It's sobering, right?
What? And so it's 3% for what? Why is it 3%? Because you think that's what you can get from a term deposit or something.
Yeah, there are some online calculators you can use. You can throw in a few multiples here and there. Here, it used to be higher, but now because of the global interest rates are ridiculously low. What they used to be, bond yields are hopeless, right? So the old conventions don't apply anymore. So now to be on the safe side, even 2.5% to 3% is actually quite a conservative approach to taking a look at, what can I live on in retirement that's comfortable, that's within my scope, with maybe a small cash stash of funds for what called big ticket items, right? Every 10 years you want a new car, hypothetically. Every 20 years you want to renovate your home, for example, things like this. I mean, I'm assuming that you've actually settled all your liabilities already, yeah? In terms of the roof of your head and whatnot. So your wealth never includes, my calculations of wealth, it never includes your home. Take that out of the equation, basically. Take a look at everything else and then build on that. And then you take a look at what you have in your portfolio. Some people are really they really love real estate. Some people really love equities, for example, or such financial instruments. But I think diversity always helps. Diversity in asset class, diversity in territorial aspects, diversity in even currency to a small or large degree. Everyone's unique. Everyone's a unique situation. So my situation is not necessarily applicable to everyone else, obviously.
Okay, yes. So giant disclaimer here. We could all be wrong. Okay. So yeah, go and do your own research on financial advice. But yeah, interesting, David. That's really interesting. And it's, I mean, I remember when I used to live in Hong Kong, and I noticed that LinkedIn article talks about forget Hong Kong, Singapore's the new darling. But when I used to live in Hong Kong, I sort of decided that, what was required to have this $250,000 a year lifestyle was $5 million in the bank and 5% interest coming out.
So, are you talking Hong Kong dollars?
Any dollars, whatever your dollars are, doesn't matter. It's 5 million at producing a 5% interest or dividend coming out of your stocks or whatever, rent or whatever your investment vehicle is $250,000. And so, and then I thought, well, what about 3% inflation? So I did some sort of numbers. Okay, well, actually, we need 8 million. 8 million, 8 million required. That was a bit of a big jump, but never mind. 8 million required to have 250,000 coming out with everything, with that money eroding at 3% a year from a normal sort of inflation level.
You can play with numbers in so many ways, right? I mean, I think I remember 5 years or 6 years ago, I was just driving. I was having a very boring drive. I began to calculate, Dave, what's your net worth? Turn it on to just pure cash, right? Okay, based on how much you're spending a year, okay, so much. How much would it last if you didn't work at all? And this money wasn't in some investment producing 2 or 3% a year, or 4% or 5%. It just sat there under your bed in a biscuit tin, right? Large. So I just I realized I didn't have to work. I didn't have to do any work for 96 until I was 96 years old. Then I realized, oh, okay, I'm ready to kind of like stop working now. And this is like 5, 6, 7 years ago. But then you see that feeling pass because I was still having a really good time, enjoyable time, But it was a good feeling to have because you then realize that you really have, you have those options in life to just close the gates, turn off the lights of the business at any time that you want. And it was a very good feeling to be. But emotionally, I took a much longer time to catch up. I think in August, August, about a year, 2 years ago, I was looking for some ski mountaineering equipment. I said, wait a minute, what do I have in the sales pipeline, in terms of work? So I looked at my calendar and there was nothing. There was absolutely no professional fee work coming in for the next 6 weeks. I looked at it for about half a minute. Then I went back to looking for the ski mountaineering equipment. Now, I think that was the day the button, that switch in my head had snapped, basically. And I think that's when I started making that strong emotional shift. But you can tell moments like that, right? I probably wasn't ready.
From buying the equipment or from the freedom of against the work?
I think it was just stuff like, no fee work, no problem, basically. So I think I emotionally began to let go from that moment, really. And even then, after that, it still wasn't an easy journey to sort of to let go in a sense. Right? That's that part. I still want to be in the thick of it, kind of thing here. And you just learn how to let go. You learn, you pick up different hobbies and interests and whatnot. And life is so rewarding. Yeah.
Do you think it's, the skiing one I get, because when you're buying ski equipment, you need to have no work to be able to use the equipment. But I wonder, what's your opinion on the identity psychology, I suppose? The idea of your identity is tied up in the work you do rather than who you really are.
And you're right about that. Facebook is a curse as well, because Facebook keeps feeding you these memories, right? And you have this constant barrage of wow, for the last consecutive 7 years, I was in Shanghai, I was in Chicago, and you ask yourself, wow, are those days really over now, kind of thing? And you get this this emotional withdrawal symptoms. Are those glory days permanently over, kind of thing? And yes, you do have this feeling of anxiety for a while, and eventually it begins to subside gradually. And like I said, I'm in a permanent state of semi-retirement. So the key emphasis is not retirement, it's semi, right? So I'm still taking work. Yeah. So I decided myself, to just keep myself current, I just need 2 paid engagements a month just to keep me current. Because when I didn't do any work for 6 months last year, 6 months, just no work at all. When I did do my first paid engagement, the client didn't notice it, but I noticed that I was misfiring my cylinders. I mean, I knew my timing was off. I was missing some key chunks of lessons here. And the client didn't notice, but I noticed. I said, wow, I am rusty. And I need at least 2 gigs a month to just stay kind of like, sharp, keep the edge sharp, so to speak. So I think it's a happy place to be, be. And of course, as the years go on, it could even be less than that, and eventually maybe nothing at all. I think that's a good way to shoeing yourself, whether you're a paid employee or you run a business, into that semi-retirement mindset. And Andrea talked about what's the mindset is helpful, right? It's the sense that you have to learn how to let go. It's not necessarily easy, but hey, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah, I liked what you were saying earlier. It's also. I mean, have we all turned 50? I'm sure we have, haven't we? Yes.
Not externally. No, sorry.
No, not externally. Just
mentally, absolutely not.
But there's something.
My hair turned 50 like 20 years ago.
But there's something about turning 50. It's the day. I mean, I remember the day I turned 50. Someone said to me, "Well, people over 50 think," and I was like, "Whoa, I'm already in this huge group of people with the same opinion overnight. How did that happen, right?" So the pigeonholing starts to begin once you get over 50. But the other thing that starts to happen is people around you do start to get sick, seriously sick, and people start to pass away. Before 50, it's rarer. After 50, the numbers are starting to move, right? And it does make you, and I think, David, you couldn't have picked a better time to get. I mean, everyone's going to be rusty when they get back to work after this pandemic is over, right? But it's giving you that distance to what's the sound's doing weird stuff. Yeah, it's giving you that sort of. It's been a good time to sort of go through the withdrawal, I suppose, because everybody's been doing it. We're not all on social media talking about what we're doing, making you envious, right? But yeah, prioritizing life, I think. But Joe, that longevity stuff, man, I'm here for a good time, not a long time. I've always said that. Somehow
No, but this is the thing, right? I mean, people are looking at it going like, "Oh, I don't want to live for a long time." But what they're working on right now, and seriously as well, I mean, as in what they managed to do with mice is that they've been able to take mice that have grown blind with age and bring their eyesight back. They've managed to bring back mice who are slow and tired with age. And now they're half their age. They're actually young again. It's not a case of keeping you alive for longer. It's about fixing the stuff. So the thinking is actually about curing aging, rather than just saying you're going to manage living longer.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good time. Listen, right? Wouldn't you love your liver to be back in shape when it was 25, right? I mean, you'd have that. If your skin cells all began to reproduce again, instead of coming to the point where now they're just getting older, right? If you just kept having new skin cells coming on as well and reproducing themselves, if your muscles would be the kind of muscles you had when you were a kid again, I mean, that's the kind of thing that is what they're working on. So a pill that is gonna cost less than $1 a day is going to remove 1/4 of the reasons why people die. They're working on almost eradicating cardiac disease, right?
But it accelerates the other 75%.
It'll make it more significant, right? But that's the kind of crazy thinking which I think sometimes we just think it's crazy. But because of all the stuff that's happening, and COVID has actually helped in a big way, because COVID's actually allowed us to learn a bit more about how mRNA and all that kind of stuff works. They're developing vaccines for things you just don't think you would develop a vaccine for. I mean, one of these days you gotta go, have you had your aging booster?
What's really interesting there, though, Joe, weirdly enough, when you think about it, is that the wealthy countries will have the larger proportion of old people that have been genetically modified to remain old, and everybody else is dying off, and we get this greater sort of separation between rich and poor places, which will be quite interesting. And $1 a day sounds like an interesting proposition now, but I think when it comes out, it'll be significantly more than that. And
no, there's some. I mean, I'll tell you what. I mean, like with Jordan, my daughter, right? She suffers from a genetic condition, right? And if we're trying to fix that condition, there is sort of something that we could try and do. It's going to cost us $2 million. It's a one-time treatment, right? Could we do it? Do we know it's absolutely going to work? We don't know for sure. That's one avenue, and that's one way of looking at genetics and stuff like that. But the other side is where actively they have these large, well-organized intellectual groups of people, financial groups as well, with the objective of creating a better world, which is accessible. And they're not trying to make it just something that the wealthy are going to benefit from only. They're going to try and make it, the stated objective is to make it inexpensive. They're not there to try and create a solution for one person. For that kind of solution, many companies already exist. If you want to step into a stem cell replacement clinic that will work on you and extract your cells and re-inject them and revive you and all that, you can. If you want to go to Russia to have a doctor inject stem cells directly into your eye and help your retina recover your eyesight when you were as you were when you were younger, there's somebody doing that, but it's not.
Just come to Thailand. I had my entire spine injected with stem cells, my own. Yeah. So just come here. It's already happening.
Yeah.
How has that worked for you? And how has that worked for you?
It fixed my neck and it fixed my upper back, but it's made my lower back worse. So,
right. So I mean, and let's look at the big numbers, right? When everyone talk about being 50, right? Like kind of a milestone. For me, the milestone was 45. Here's why I woke up one morning, 45, and then I did some math, and I realized that the average lifespan of a Singapore male is about 83. Then you suddenly realize, oh my God, I've lived more years than there are left to live statistically. That's kind of depressing, isn't it? Since you've gone past that high point and now you're just going downhill. And no matter whether these life extension, life quality, life enhancing treatments are available in the near future, ultimately we can't beat Father Time in that sense. So I think still the pressing intentionality has to be, let's make the most of the years that we have left. And if we have done enough planning with intentionality, we are going to try and work on a high quality second phase of our life. I think that's broadly where I think many people need to start really putting some intentionality into, actually. So sobering, right? When you reach more life, you've lived more years than there are left to live. Wow.
My grandma made it to 104, so if I'm still kicking by then, it'll be interesting.
I tell you, one of the things that I've experienced in my own life very recently, for the longest time, I felt terrible, just absolutely horrible at what my 25-year-old self didn't do, right? And I call it my daytime nightmare. Is when I think about loving Apple products as much as I did, having all the money that I had at the time, and not buying a single share, right?
We're back to his Apple.
Yeah, that's the nightmare, right? So to put it in context, I just very quickly, $10,000 down, 1997, just ignored it until now. Most people can't guess the value of that investment right now, and the answer is more than $25 million, right? But put that aside,
you idiot.
Put that aside, and now think about this, right? So I'm 52 today, and if I fully expect to live to, let's say I don't make the extended numbers, I make it to 75 or 80, right? I have enough time to be angry at myself 25 years ago again.
Bye, APL.
Yeah, so this is what I'm doing. I'm thinking about things in terms of a 25-year runway. I'm not thinking about it in terms of what I'm doing today now.
That's a really good point. That's a good point. And I mean, it's the old adage: the best time to grow an oak tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I like when Andrea said the big number 50. For David, it was 45. I had one moment at 47 where I realized it's a bit odd. In the 40s, your early 40s until you're 44, you're still early 40s. When you're 45, you're mid 40s. When you're 46, you're mid 40s. But 47, you're late 40s. So it's very skewed. And then you're late 40s. So I was all of a sudden in my late 40s, and I'm still okay. But when I turned 50 this year, so in April this year, I didn't think anything of it much, but I started to get a lot of external reinforcers when you're clicking what age bracket you're in. And so all of a sudden, you're 50 to 59. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
or above 50 or something. And for some things, I get senior discounts for being 50. And I'm like, what the hell is happening? And then for
Social
some of
media
them,
advertising, right?
yeah, for some of them they're a bit delayed. And then with COVID in there as well, especially last year, but this year as well, but especially last year where it just stopped my business in a large way. And it was very, especially the announcement that came out, non-essential businesses, everything stopped. And I know that was everybody apart from supermarkets and doctors, but it really just spoke to me to saying, actually what you do is non-essential. It's non-essential. And for me, it was like, everything I invest everything in getting better at and everything else is non-essential. And so then that's it's got a detrimental aspect to it and a positive aspect. The detrimental aspect is if you stay in that belief, that can be very mentally destabilizing. But at the same time, it was a great prod. It was David's boring drive, which is a lesson to everybody out there listening. Don't go and get the vintage car that gives you more responsiveness and your drive is no longer boring, because you won't think of these things that David thought about when he had his boring drive in his electric vehicle. Not quite electric, but it was boring anyway. But that prod, it's almost like life or experience or something is going to give you a prod, and maybe this show is giving you that prod. And I guess that's the intention of what David's lesson is prod yourself again. Give yourself that prod, or be prodded to think, to know, and to start having, when he talks about intentionality, just sort of sit down with a pencil and paper and start scribbling numbers and durations, and just get a visual on what the possibilities and probabilities are. And do you need to make a course correction? Because Joe's wisdom on, when you're 75 looking back to when you're 50, what did you do differently? Or when you're 80 looking back to when you were 60 or 55, what did you do differently? It's really good. It's a really interesting one. You can make the change now, which is interesting. So we all can. I like it. Thanks.
All right. I know David wants to sort of head off soon. We've already kept him well over time. But I just figure we can finish up with what's keeping you distracted at the moment. So, David, just so you know, you could be watching it. I think I actually think I know the answer. It could be, the car thing, but also what you're watching, podcasts, books, whatever. So
actually, it's humbling myself and learning new skills. So I'm being distracted by, for example, getting into more like craft, woodwork, welding, for example. So I've got a welding project that's coming up. Never done that kind of thing before. So that's kind of like keeping me distracted. It's partly connected with restoring old cars, but it's a new skill, like using welding tools and whatnot, power saws and that. So that's keeping me distracted. Being a student again.
Nice, Tim.
Foundation on Apple TV was keeping me distracted. Also read an article about why Vikings weren't where we're from. That was interesting reading for news that was weird. So they're not all blonde hair, blue eyed, by the way. They were from all over the place. And the idea was being a Viking was a lifestyle, not a genetic trait, which was interesting. It wasn't ethnicity, it was a lifestyle. But yeah, Foundation and Wheel of Time. So sci-fi, fantasy stuff. So Foundation on Apple TV is quite interesting. We're talking about, Joe was talking about sort of taking cells and cloning and all of this sort of stuff. That was a big part of Foundation and the Empire. But yeah, I've been doing that. What else have I been doing? I'll think about it while Joe tells his.
Yeah.
Well, I've hardly been getting any sleep in the past couple of weeks because I have entered the dark corners of crypto known as DeFi, or where basically all these financial products are being turned into little engines and machines and whatever it is. It's distracting because of what it can do. It's fascinating because of how it works. And in terms of the results as well, it deserves every kind of attention that I'm giving to it right now. Just to give you an example, what happens in the DeFi world, my account's grown $60,000 in the last week, right?
Wow.
And yeah, but I didn't get much sleep, so there was a price to pay for it. And I had a mentor that was really screaming at me for doing this wrong and that wrong, whatever it is, and I was learning and getting it done. I tried to create or tried to think about what this is like. It's sort of like Lehman Brothers, but over a 24-hour period. You know, if you if you think about how things develop and move and tactics work, right? It is one of the most fascinating places. It is about game theory. It's about finance. It's about exceptional profits. It's about structured Ponzi schemes, and they don't seem to see it as a bad thing. But it's a world. And the thing about this is, as much as people look at it and go like, oh, this is a terrible thing that's happening over there, it is going to change the way things work when it settles down. Like a part of the LinkedIn article was about how property was going to be managed in terms of NFTs. Yeah. And that actually was one of the early ideas of what a blockchain was going to be all about. You know, we're going to be absolutely sure that this property belongs to you, and we won't have to argue about that. There won't be anyone who can come along and steal a property title from you, because it's going to be immutable. So, yeah, it's a crazy space. I do not recommend it for anybody who wants to keep emotionally sane, because the swings can really take a toll on you. But it's not to be ignored. And the question that I was going to ask everybody is, like, if you had your $10,000 to put on something that you want to come back to in 25 years and just forget about it and see what happens, where would you put it? You know,
I'd put it with Joe.
I put it in a couple of cases of Chateau Latour or Lafitte. Come back 25 years.
If I can tell you about one crazy idea, this is going to keep some of you awake, right? So there's an idea called stable coins, where it's a cryptocurrency that's based on certain, stable currencies. And there actually is one well-regulated, MAS regulated, that actually is a Singapore stable coin. So essentially, $1 in this stable coin is $1 Singapore dollar, right? And we hear people kind of pursuing all the different kinds of interest rates to go everywhere. So would you like to know what this is one of the most conservative products you could invest in, right? The Singapore stablecoin offers interest rates of between 10 and 15%. Right?
That's high, right?
It's huge. And the question that Dave's going to ask is risk, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. No one's asking about risk. Well, there's always inherent risk.
Its name sort of doesn't imply risk, right? Stable
and
coin.
The fact that MAS is allowing you to do it says it's reasonable.
Yeah.
Well, MAS is looking at it and they understand it, and they're keeping an eye, and they think, okay, this is an okay pursuit in terms of how cryptocurrencies work. But there is some risk involved. But if you talk about something like a generally low risk in that space, that's available as well. So it's crazy stuff. Tim, you should talk a little bit about mining, because I think what you're doing is brilliant as well.
Yeah, well, we're mining because as all the transactions are happening, somebody needs to approve the transaction, and that's what the miners do. And as a result, they get paid a commission, and so you can have a mining rig that produces basically you can produce the return of a reasonable rental property every month for the price of about 10% of that 5% of that property here in Singapore, which is interesting.
But still have the risk. But it's
the only risk you've got a couple of risks, but the main risk you have is that in 20 years you can sell that property. In 20 years the rig won't be worth anything. Because the technology will have advanced well beyond the capabilities of the rig, but it will produce those sorts of incomes for a few years. So
tell me, Tim, does the rig require a flux capacitor?
1.21 gigawatts, yes, and that's a lot of trees.
I was just going to say, for everyone out there who's listening to Tim and Joe and just going, what the hell are they talking about? Like, I think there's so many people that just don't get this yet. And trust me, I work hard at trying to understand things. For some reason, the way people communicate around this topic of cryptos and blockchain, and it's so hard to grasp as a subject. It really is. But I think we've all got to keep trying to understand it because it is part of our future, right?
Let's do a no-show on it.
Yeah, I think we should. And maybe see if we can get someone in. But we can't get an expert. We need someone who's because what I'm struggling with is understanding it from what's being communicated at the moment. So it's not being communicated well, and I things make sense to me quickly, right? But it's not. It doesn't. It's just
it's because once you get into it, there's a lingo. Once you get into the lingo, you start talking the lingo, then everybody knows what the hell you're talking about, and it's. I would like to learn more about the land grab in the metaverse as well.
Yeah.
There's a reason why there aren't many Neil deGrasse Tysons, right? Because astrophysicists, they work at a level where they can understand each other's formulas and papers and all that, but they don't necessarily know how to make friends, right? So it's the skill, the bridge is actually where that comes in. Most of the people who are in crypto, they're not going to tell you. They assume it's not, and they don't mean harm at all. It's just that they just operate in a different way of thinking all the time, and they'll say a term, and you're supposed to understand what it is. And if they've just even mentioned it at some point in the past, they might even get mad at you for not remembering what it is. So that's my life now.
I'm determined to understand it, and when I do, I'll try and communicate it in a way that maybe can help the people who are like me. Not understanding it. But anyway, so one of the things that I'm being distracted by at the moment is on Apple TV, and it's called The Network. Have you guys heard that? Jennifer Aniston, Reese Witherspoon. It's one of the big sort of
morning show, right?
Shows.
It's called Morning Show, I think.
Oh, yeah. What did I say? The Network for? The Morning Show. I've got Facebook in my head. It's absolutely sensational, and it's so multi-dimensional. So the Me Too movement, from the male and the female perspective, just women in that career, men in that career, office politics. If you have an opportunity to watch it, it's absolutely sensational. I'm loving it. Even Steve's enjoying it.
Is that you stuck in season 1 still?
Yes.
It's a great series and so well acted as well. Fantastic.
Oh, very really powerful acting, right?
I've avoided it because it's a news show.
Yeah, but
it's not that.
Reese Witherspoon and her she's doing so much work to give voice to women's stories.
She's amazing.
And I just really wanted to support that, and that's why I started watching it. But I think it's I think it's incredibly powerful. But let's wrap up. I know David wants to go. This semi-retirement stuff, he's got a car to tinker with. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Final show of the year.
Andrea. Thank you everyone for your inputs. Great conversations.
Yeah, I enjoyed that, David. Very, very nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Joe and Tim for being my sidekick. And I thought, it's our last show of the year. Do you want to leave everyone with a bit of a end of year message?
Well, my first question is, when are we back?
14th of January.
14th. Okay, good.
Yeah. For me, one thing that has really changed my life is to keep searching for that thing that's going to give you hope. Because many times you yeah, thanks, Tim. Tim is my Tim is my discount supplier for AppSumo apps.
I'm your pusher.
Yeah. Don't give up on looking for the thing that's gonna give you some hope. Still be skeptical, but measure things carefully. There are opportunities that are still coming by. Don't convince yourself that the time has gone past. And if you really think that there's no way anything's good's going to happen, at least know that if you're just above 50, there's a high chance that you're going to look back in 25 years and possibly be mad about something you didn't do.
Yeah, right.
I like that actually. It's a good one. Mine is just very Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, wonderful end of year to everybody, and whatever your festivus thing is, have a fantastic time, and really just spend time with family and friends and discuss what's great, and just remember gratitude and look forward to a 2022 where possibilities abound.
Yeah. David, do you want to say anything?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Actually, so wishing
Yeah, happy?
every great 2022 ahead, and safe days ahead for everyone. Yeah. So it's goodbye from me.
See you, David.
Yeah, and so for me, it's just be the light for others in the world. You know, everyone's been through a really, really hard time, but there's a lot of, there's a rising depression, anxiety, suicides. Like, it's been a really, really difficult time, and it's going to impact some generations for years, decades to come. So I think if we can all make that commitment just to be the light for others, especially if we've got the strength to be that light, feel the feelings you're feeling. Don't resist them, because they're not, it's tough. But let's hope 2022 is better, and thanks for the support, and happy holidays, happy New Year. We'll see you in January. Yeah.
Stay in the know.
I just end up the show by blowing into Andrea's ear, but through Tim's head.
Oh dear, why do I do this? All right,
Do it again,
guys.
Do it again,
See you
Joe.
guys.
One more time.